Hey. Oh, I can't hear you yet. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, I can
How's
hear you
that?
now. Yeah, that's good.
Okay, sweet.
You got
Cool. Yeah,
a
I got my
it,
microphone set up.
nice. And you got a nice beard that's come in since I've last seen
Yeah.
you.
Started growing it the day COVID started, or the day I started working from home, I guess.
Are you thinking of growing it until you get back in the office?
Yeah, that's the plan, more or less.
Nice.
So we'll
Nice.
see how that goes.
Nice. Well, nice to chat. I think the last time we chatted, I think was the Think Better workshop that was planned, and then I think it was just when COVID kind of first hit and everyone stopped going out as much. So I think that's
Yeah.
the last time we chatted.
Yeah. Yeah. What a weird time.
Feels like a long time ago. How have you been?
Pretty good, pretty good. Enjoying life. Like the pace doesn't stop.
Yeah,
It's like certain elements have calmed down, which lets like the more important things take more like space.
right.
How about with you?
Yeah, I feel the same. Uh, I think for me, maybe it feels like things have calmed down a bit. But I know you've been really involved in end coronavirus, that initiative, which seems like that would be time consuming.
I've actually slowed down my involvement with them.
Okay.
Um, it's funny, my involvement with different organizations seems to be like it's like single step that I make makes logical sense, and I could only be where I am now because I've made those steps.
What do you what
Like
do you mean by that?
end coronavirus led me to like interacting with a bunch of complexity wizards. And then from there, I went and started partaking in this ecosystem called Team Earth, which led me to an ecosystem called Dig Life Collective or Digital Life Collective, which is like very big into the co-op space. So I was starting to think about alternative forms of organizations, and that led me to thinking more about nonprofits. And now I'm in conversations with like the Post Growth Institute, talking about how potentially one of the things that we need to do to get onto like the new platform is to go to a not for profit um, ecosystem instead of a for profit ecosystem,
Cool.
which is like our conversation today.
Yes. No, I'm excited to chat with you about the blog post you wrote, but you just name dropped a bunch of different things that I'm not familiar with. So like w Complexity Wizards, Team Earth, uh, a couple other things. Do you mind just for myself just giving like a synopsis of what those things are? I'm just curious.
Yeah, definitely. So, N coronavirus, the thing that was exciting about that was that it was a decentralized organization working to tackle a very complex problem. Like, this requires coordination from like globally, it requires coordination at multiple levels of supply chain. There's so many interconnected pieces. And of course, we're tackling a virus that is challenging in a different, in it's challenging on so many different levels. From a political level, it's challenging from a fact that the virus itself is evolving. So that was sort of like that experience. And so a whole bunch of people were attracted to that organization that were very strong in complexity theory. And it's funny because the first thing that a complexity wizard, as I refer to them, does is they identify the leverage points within the organization, the spots where small changes here and there will result in larger changes in the system. And so a bunch of these wizards were starting to find each other because they would end up in the same parts of the organization. Because, oh, the, the leverage right here, right now, is in onboarding volunteers. We don't do a good job of it. The inflow of volunteers is greatly outpacing our ability to actually place them into meaningful positions. So if we can fix this particular process, it means the entire organism will just do it like so much better. So I came across a whole bunch of wizards there.
So these are like
And
internal consultant type people. Like that's how, is that fair to say, or is it different?
there's a whole bunch of different types of complexity
Okay.
wizards. So everything from like network weavers who would basically understand the entire network of people and connect different nodes in the network so that the overall organism would actually understand things better. Like it improves the sense making capacity of the organization.
Okay, so you can have
That would be like
different
one.
kind of specialties. Okay.
Yeah. So one of the wizards went and was working on this thing that basically took N coronavirus, but went one level meta. And she started building a map of various organizations that were trying to work on fighting coronavirus. So that project was called Team Earth. And a bunch of the top-notch people within N coronavirus were like, okay, yes, I understand you've just gone meta on the whole organization, and that's actually the level that we should be playing at right now. So a bunch of like really good talent went to help with that and is solving various problems at a meta level.
Cool. With the
Um,
idea that it's the problem's bigger than just end coronavirus, like looking at it from as
yeah.
holistically as
So
possible. Cool.
and coronavirus has like 3,000 volunteers that are active, maybe. Um, to go meta level, you're coordinating with N coronavirus and a whole bunch of other people.
Yeah,
So, and what is the infrastructure and networks that we're building right now that's actually going to play an even larger role after coronavirus is done?
got it. Okay. Um, yeah, I'm curious. I think this journey is interesting, like how you got to this blog post around maybe we can live in a world without for profits. So, okay, the next step from Team Earth was how did you how did you get to the writing the blog post?
So the next step over there would be over to this arena called the Dig Life Collective or the Digital Life Co-op, um, which is a collection of companies that all operate in a sort of cooperative way that are starting to form their own self-aware ecosystem. Um, I forget what their tagline is, but it's something about like technology we can trust or something like that. Like there's like Mattermost, which is a Slack alternative that is open source, so people can see into this. So it's a whole bunch of organizations that are value aligned, that are working together and actually like in a sense operate like a larger organism, like a corporation with a bunch of different departments. You could kind of think of it that way. Um, and so that got me really interested in co-ops as a space. What does it mean where all of the organizations here are able to collaborate because they're all mission aligned? And does an ecosystem like this, is this able to outcompete for profits who are by necessity not able to collaborate as well as all of these places that are their purpose is cooperation and like mission, versus in the for-profit space, each organization is sort of like every man for himself, trying to make as much profit as possible for their shareholders.
Got it. Okay. Cool. Um, yeah, the I liked a lot of the stuff you wrote. One of the things that resonated, which is like I guess when you say it out loud, very simple, but one of the ways you identify that non-profits could outcompete for-profits is just that for-profits need to tack on profit on any product or service. So if something costs $10 to deliver, the for-profit needs to sell it for more than $10, while the nonprofit can sell it for $10 and just has an edge there, which it's simple, but it makes a lot of sense. Um, and am I right in understanding it that you think the main reason that we have the main reason we don't have entirely nonprofits today is that you think that measurement has been the main challenge with nonprofits versus for-profits? Is that fair to say, or are there other main challenges?
I'd say my thinking before yesterday was that it seems that our current platform of humanity is based on, or at least our cultural norms seem to suggest that most people should be chasing money. Try to get as much money as possible, make yourself financially secure. And so if you have a society based on individuals that are seeking personal profit, once you put a group of individuals together who are also seeking profit, you end up with the current capitalist society. For me, it was something around the shift needs to be people should connect to what it is that drives them, like what is your purpose in life. And if you have most of society operating on a purpose level where, say, our basic needs are met, and I don't need to make a salary of 200,000 for me to have $10 million to buy as much stuff as I want is not actually my goal in life. I want to make the world a better place. I want to protect the future generations of humanity. I thought we needed a societal shift to get to this other part so that we would tend to emerge organizations that were more purpose driven. Since writing the blog post, though, a couple of people have reached out to me. I don't know how they found the post, but they were interested in having conversations with me because there's a whole school of thought that's actually like in the same vein as what I'm thinking about. And so they've actually corrected my blog post in a bunch of different ways. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. It's really cool. So I'm hoping to share some of that thinking with you today.
Yeah, definitely. Where would you like to start?
So let's start with what's wrong with our current system.
Okay.
Right now, we can think of the current capitalist society as being extractive in nature. So the profit being that part that is extracted from any cycle. So if I'm running a company, you can picture a cycle where I'm producing a good and service, I'm selling that to a customer, I'm getting revenue. Part of that revenue is profit, which will actually get extracted out of the company and go towards some sort of private individual or group of individuals. And then whatever is left from that goes to improving the business such that we can now make a better product or service that is even more valuable to customers. And that's the cycle. The thing is that this is not a closed loop because you have this extractive process. So what is happening with the money that's getting extracted? Well, it's going to the individuals that are good at basically extracting value. And so in this type of system, the wealth accumulates to these people. Maybe I'm really, really good at this and I extract $10 million out of all of the things that I do. I've provided a ton of value to society, but I've also taken $10 million of value out of that, and it's now mine. I die. My kids inherit this. They use that value because the more wealth you have, there's a lot of other feedback loops that say, I can now make even more bets. And if everybody's wealth is growing at 5%, if I have 10 million right now, I'm going to way out compete somebody who's born into nothing. So the engine of our current society with its extractive properties means that the wealth is accumulating in particular places and not in others. It's not circulating. Like imagine if we were a body and like we had an extractive mechanism, which is just like our blood will just like continue to go like out. Actually, that's an interesting example because you could continue to eat and continue to extract amounts of blood from yourself into this other place, but you actually need to continue eating, which is like our current society is actually running off of extracting resources from the earth, which is a finite thing. So if you're given finite resources and you have this extractive quality, it's going to collapse. Like it cannot go forever. It's not sustainable.
So maybe I don't think I've fully wrapped my head around everything you just said, but in the analogy you gave, like, are you implying that because you're leaking blood, you're gonna consume and eat more than you need to, and that's what you're talking about in terms of us kind of over consuming, or no?
Maybe not. I think the analogy falls down a little bit right there.
Okay.
But I'll point to the next step in this equation as well, which is that right now, like, how do we get money? I think I was just reading, I think 97% of the money that exists is actually created from somebody else borrowing. Like there's a one-to-one in terms of debt to money created. And so for all of the money that is growing as our GDP grows, it's actually banks creating money because what they'll do is they'll loan money to someone, which creates a debt, but it also creates more money in the system. So 90% of the money supply is 97% of the money supply is actually could be wiped out if you like collapsed all of the debt with all of the money that exists. So as the stock market continues to grow and people keep making more and more money, which keep in mind is being extracted and put into the hands of a very few amount of people, the debt is also growing at an equivalent rate. And the debt is accumulating in different parts of our society. So it's accumulating to the people that owe mortgages, or it's accumulating to the businesses that are actually unsuccessful. And so you've got inequality being driven at both ends with the current cycle. So with each spin of the capitalist wheel, more of the money goes to certain people and more of the debt accrues at the bottom. And that is really scary for society. That's the kind of thing that leads to collapse. So that's the thing that we need to solve for, which is how do we actually get the money supply to be circulating through all different parts of the economy? And that's where not-for-profits come in.
So let's say you only had nonprofits. Uh, Employees of the nonprofits still get a salary. Um, and as far as I understand, there's no rules around like how much someone can get paid. I guess my question is, um, can could you still have the same kind of greed exist in a nonprofit organization?
Yes, you could.
Okay.
It's just far less likely to happen
And
because the
why is it less likely?
so let me give you the definition of nonprofit that I'm working with,
Okay.
um, which would be um, a purpose-driven company where no individual can profit from it. Like take IKEA. IKEA is a not-for-profit. Um,
I didn't know that.
yeah,
Really?
it's insane the number of organizations that are not-for-profits. Like it's actually a growing number of GDP. Like as a percentage of GDP, not-for-profits are growing at double the rate of for-profits.
Wow. Well, that's great. That's great to see.
The wealthiest company in the world was a not-for-profit until recently, which is some Saudi oil company. No individual could profit off of that Saudi oil company. It was actually government owned, or the profits would go to the government, who would then put it back into like paying for social services, which was the sort of like foundation that like had a purpose. So it can be some sort of company that is owned by a foundation, as long as the foundation does not exist to serve a particular person. As long as they are purpose driven, they can create as much profit as they want, but the profit all has to go back into the purpose, aka back into the cycle. It cannot be extracted from the cycle.
Okay.
So that's
Uh,
IKEA. The person who created IKEA was purpose driven. It's actually IKEA is owned by a foundation, or like 90 something percent is owned by a foundation. So all of the profit that IKEA makes goes into this foundation, which now can only spend that money to further its own purpose.
okay. Um, so I'm just trying to think about how wealth can still accumulate through salaries. And in a not-for-profit, if someone has a lot of expertise and adds a lot of value, it might still make sense to pay them exorbitant amounts of money. I'm just trying to wrap my head around like, do non-for-profits solve some of the issues you highlighted around kind of greed and growing inequality and stuff like that?
I still don't have all the gears fully worked out. Like I wrote that post mainly off of like my own thinking, and then in having more further conversations, it's really helping me to like get some more gears, but it's still not fully fleshed out in my mind. Um, I would point to the fact that like the main the thing that causes people to become rich is through investment. Most people, like even if you're looking at the CEO salaries, most of their actual benefits is um, through options and through share appreciation. Um, so yeah, you could have certain individuals that are taking really like you could have certain individuals that are paid really high salaries, but then look at their kids their kids can't just take this like mountain of wealth and like turn that into more money. They would actually have to do a thing with their labor to
Interesting.
actually provide value that somebody else would have to
That's a
value.
good point. That's a good point. Cool. Uh, in terms of trust in nonprofits versus for profits. Um, like I don't know if government is considered a nonprofit, but they're definitely not a for profit. And I've
By
seen
my
like
definition, yeah,
they are, yeah,
it's a perfect purpose driven enterprise. So like they may charge for some services, um, and but all any like if a part of the government profits, no individual gets wealthy. That money goes back into the ecosystem, so it keeps circulating.
okay. So I've seen some articles and stuff suggesting that big business, although not entirely trustworthy all the time, like a lot of people trust big business more than government. Like, how do you think about how trust might play in for profit versus nonprofit? Because I would think intuitively a nonprofit would be more trustworthy, more aligned with my values, more focused on, yeah, more purpose driven.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I guess with a not for profit, you could see their purpose. And so if like trust is built into their values or something like that, like the entire co-op ecosystem of tech we trust, I would trust those guys. Like there's many different elements of trust, but I think I would trust those more than certain for profits. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Um, I like personally, I trust, or at least I trust Canadian government more than big business. But I guess it depends on which country you live in and stuff like that. Um,
Yeah.
I'm actually just gonna run to the washroom really quick. I drank
Sure.
a ton of water before this. This is not a good call. I'll be right back. Sorry.
No worries.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries.
Um, yeah, so I was just thinking about some of the issues with potentially for profits and how nonprofits could maybe solve them. Like I was thinking about how a for profit might set out with a certain goal, like a noble goal to solve something, but then they reach that goal, but you have investors and expectations to continue to grow, and maybe that's where you could run into trouble, and then you start producing things that people don't need or something like that. And I was just trying to think through, would that issue not exist in a nonprofit, or could you have a similar thing where, just because the nonprofit reaches their goal, a lot of people are employed there, they don't want to lose their job and find new work. um Anyways, I don't have it figured out exactly in my head, but any thoughts related to that, or any other directions you want to go?
So like you can sort of think of different organizations on a bit of a continuum, from say like the Milton Friedman, like uh, the only purpose of business is is profit. So like any company that is publicly traded, like what do the shareholders want? Well, if I'm buying the stocks in this company, it's because I think it's going to make me money, and it's actually like quite pure in that sense. There's also like consider corporations with like a triple bottom line where they are trying to also provide other value, or there's B corporations. You've also got like co-ops, and like the co-op ecosystem is where the employees, well, there's a couple different types of co-op, but like say an employee owned co-op, um, the the better that the company does in the co-op, the more the more benefits actually accrue to the employees that work there. So there's not a third person who's extracting the value, but all of the employees are still extracting more value. If they double their revenue or they double their profit, that goes to all the employees, which is great. Now, a not for profit would actually, what actually happens is that their purpose is everything to them. So they might have a board of directors And at their shareholder meet, or not shareholder meetings, but at their board meetings, they basically say, how well is this company doing towards these objectives, towards our purpose? So it's a little bit more pure on the like purpose side, and nobody is even trying to profit. That being said, like a lot of what we think about when we talk about nonprofits would be charities, where they get all of their money. It's like rich people philanthropy. They give it to this thing to do a purpose. But that's actually not how most of these things, most of the not-for-profits are operating right now. So if you look at the whole like spectrum of these not-for-profits, as I've sort of defined it, about 53% of all of their revenue is actually self-generated, coming from fees or selling a service or a good. 35% of that actually comes from the government in terms of their like revenues or cash flows, and 12% comes from philanthropy. So just in terms of like the whole ecosystem of not-for-profits, it really actually does resemble the for-profit model more than I think the average person realizes.
Hmm. Why? Any thoughts on why there isn't like a nonprofit social media platform that's mainstream? I'm trying to think of like, and maybe, well, the fact that I didn't know IKEA was a not-for-profit, maybe I'm missing a bunch, but like the only kind of tech-related not-for-profits that come to, like Wikipedia comes to mind for me.
Yeah.
Um,
Mozilla,
yeah,
Firefox, yeah.
yeah. Um, and I guess there's like DuckDuckGo, but not that commonly used. Um, so yeah, curious your thoughts on why we all use Google search and not DuckDuckGo when to me like there's some clear benefits associated with having like using a product that's a not for profit.
Yeah. Well, if you graduate right now, or you think about going to like Y Combinator and seeking out seed funding, what is the typical career path? Or for somebody wanting to start a business, what is it that you consider? I think a lot of people don't even consider nonprofits right now. And like part of that goes back to me pointing at the thing that's like our society, our source code is like, well, get rich or die trying. I don't know if you listen to hip hop music, like, um, but yeah, I think one of the things that's giving me hope about thinking about this is that if pressed, I think a lot of economists and a lot of people in the world realize that our current economy and capitalist society is actually unsustainable, and they can tell that we're driving ourselves towards a cliff. We are headed towards collapse, but we don't have an alternative narrative. It's not like you go to university and your business prof is like, oh yeah, also nonprofits have all of the same benefits of these other things, but also they have happier employees. They tend to do a more sustainable job of things. You can also, here's how nonprofits raise money, because like maybe you're not trying to seek out investment, but you can actually seek out bonds. There's impact investors. There's all these other ways of raising capital. It should be about as easy to start a nonprofit as it is to start a for-profit. And it should give you so much more freedom if what you're really trying to do is change the world. And so with the Post Growth Institute, I don't know exactly what their strategy is, but I believe it has something to do with pointing out not even pointing out the flaws of the current system, because I think most people understand that if they think deeply about it, the extractive nature of our current society. But it's actually just highlighting the fact that the alternative narrative is actually running. It's actually growing. And like just even pointing at all of the different business models, like the Green Bay Packers are a not-for-profit. Bosch, which is like one of the most successful like appliance companies, not-for-profit. IKEA, like you keep pointing at all of these things and you're like, yeah, like it's crazy. The entire Welsh water supply was run by a for-profit in the US. The Welsh people actually created a foundation that bought out that for-profit by a foundation that was not for profit. They financed the whole thing through bonds, and people were like, "Yeah, I'll loan you the money so that you can do this thing, because it fits my purpose. If you look at like the share of income invest or impact investment, it's like the growth rate, I think, I can't even give you a number, but I did the research before and it was like much higher than like the growth for just like philanthropy in general. The world is changing. And I think the thing that we need to do is accelerate the rate of growth to this new ecosystem, which solves most of the problems. It's a race between, can we publicize this new economy fast enough that we can make the transition before we actually hit the collapse that is sort of coming.
So can you help me understand how, in your eyes, not nonprofits help lead to a more sustainable world with less overconsumption? Because I'm just trying to think, and I'm thinking that even in a world with all nonprofits, um, like could you not see the same kind of population growth, um, and the same demand for, like, for instance, I know that like air travel produces a lot of um, CO2 emissions. People, like, I would think that under a nonprofit, people still want to travel. People still want like heat in their home. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around like how does it create a more sustainable world?
Mm. I'd like to explore that one with you, actually. I don't have the gears here.
Okay.
I think,
Yeah, no worries.
yeah, like one of the things that I've been pointed to is like, if you look at the evidence, employees in non not for profits make more on average than those at for profits. Not for profits tend to be much more sustainable than for profits. Like in terms of like one of the things that Bosch said was, because we are not for profit, we actually have invested so much more into our R&D on sustainability for each of our like appliances than our competitors have, um, because that's one of the things that we value. And if you have companies that all have purposes, I assume people's purposes are pro-social. How does that change the world? Um, Something about like negative externalities of for profits. If you're just seeking profit, you don't care about the negative externalities. But if you're a not for profit, you would care about them, or something like that might be baked into your purpose, which means that you would consider it more. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. So let's say we take air travel as an example, maybe. And let's say we lived in a world that where nonprofits was the only, I guess, type of organization. For profits didn't exist. And, Boeing and these different companies are assembling aircrafts. The goal, their purpose might be to help enable travel. Um, I'm trying to think how having it as a nonprofit leads to better outcomes in terms of quicker transition to renewable sources of energy and stuff like that for their aircrafts. I, I I don't have it figured out. I'm trying to think about like how what's the difference?
And I don't even imagine that the airline industry would look that much different actually. Uh, like in the first part, the airline industry isn't very profitable. Most airlines actually don't make profit.
But maybe whatever profits are made today are going, like you said, they're getting extracted, as opposed to maybe that money could have been used to invest in R&D towards renewable energy. Like, does it get you to a world? I'm just trying to think. If you don't have profit being extracted, do you get do you get to a world with renewable energy quicker?
Well, I'm imagining that a bunch of these companies would actually be competing on different purposes. So maybe one would be to enable inexpensive travel for the most number of people, in which case maybe they'll just go with whatever's cheapest. But because they're not extracting the profit, they're going to be able to be pretty cheap. Maybe another one says sustainable travel or something like that. And that would actually be preferred by all of the people that are like, actually, sustainability matters to me. And if it turns out that humanity values sustainable travel over cheap travel or larger swaths, it would be enough to sustain that other not for profit.
Hmm. So I'm just trying to think. Like one thing that came to mind is like that to me that can exist in for profits too. Um, I don't know enough about the airline industry, but like clothing comes to mind where, to your point, for people who want super inexpensive clothing and don't care as much about the environment, you can go shop at Walmart, or you could buy more expensive clothing brands that, to your point, their purpose, they're more, even though they're for profit, they value sustainability more. Um, so maybe it could still exist in for profit, but it's better aligned in nonprofit. And I guess the data point you had speaks for itself in that you said that the data shows that nonprofits are more sustainable.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing would be look at like what would happen if we considered the second order effects of less inequality in society, where instead of just Jeff Bezos becoming, what is he, a billionaire? I don't know.
Yeah,
Instead of
he's got over $100 billion, I think.
okay, instead of Jeff Bezos having $100 billion and realizing that the fact that Jeff Bezos has $100 billion means that $100 billion of debt exists somewhere else in the system, accumulating in the poor people. So these poor people are having shitty life outcomes. They're taking shitty jobs. Their health outcomes are bad, are worse, and they are incentivized to buy the cheapest travel, to buy the cheapest clothing because they cannot care about having better like ecological or like living wages elsewhere in the world because they're forced that way because of the inequality. So if Jeff Bezos and the debt at the bottom come together and get wiped out, okay, people at the bottom now have more money, and you just like replicate that over and over again because that's the new cycle. The money stays in the overall like circulating through people instead of accumulating in certain individuals. Might our values change?
Do you
What are
mind
the second orders? Yeah.
do you mind trying to walk me through the bank example again? Just so I wrap my head around it, so that I understand how his $100 billion results in $100 billion of debt.
Sure. So so let's pretend there's like TD Bank over there in the corner, and I want to I want to get a house. So the bank's like, okay, here's here's like a
A
hundred
loan.
thousand, yeah, $1 million, so you can buy your house, Ryan. Now I owe the bank 100 mil, or I owe the bank $1 million, and they've created, and I have a debt of $100 million, but I've also just paid $100 million to someone who's just sold me the house. So
a
now
million
somebody
dollars.
else in the economy is like $1 million richer, and I have $1 million of debt. And
And
that transaction
the
can
bank
occur
didn't,
without any money
right,
happening. The bank
the
doesn't need
bank didn't
money.
have that money. They're
Yeah.
loaning out more money than they actually own.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's what apparently 97% of all the money in the world is, just that. Because now that $1 million is in circulation, and now that $1 million, that guy can go and buy some stocks, which now a company has some stuff, or they can go do some other stuff. But yeah, it's $1 million that didn't exist. And now if there's 100 of me, that's $100 million that's just created out of nothing. $100 million of debt created, $100 million that is now circulating in the economy. So where does that money end up? Well, that money that we've just created in today's system, it accumulates in the richest people who basically control all of the corporations.
Okay. I think I got
It,
it.
yeah.
The part I um don't entirely understand is like how it works. Like how does it work that 97% of money is artificial in a sense? Like how do we just manufacture the money? Like how does the system work? I don't fully understand. And I went to business school, so I don't know how the average person is supposed to understand it. Maybe that's the
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. And what happens when the US government just prints $3 trillion? Because I don't imagine that they created $3 trillion of debt. So
Right.
like, did that 97% after the US government just did that? Like, did that just become like 95%? I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't know. So I think the question that I had on kind of my list of questions was like, should I start a nonprofit or for profit? And I think I wrote that down as I was maybe thinking about like, okay, if the next thing, if I do start something, like how should I make that decision? So you started Think Better, you made it a nonprofit. Did you consider making it a for profit? If not, are there any are there any scenarios today that you think like if you were to start something, it would still make sense to make it a for profit, or to you is the answer always a nonprofit?
Based on what I've seen, I actually cannot justify starting a for-profit. Like, I could get access to capital in a not-for-profit just as easy as I could as a for-profit. Um, Everything I want to do in the world has purpose behind it, and like I come from a place of privilege. I actually I don't need more money per se. I don't need to make, and like one of the things about a for-profit is that you have unlimited amounts of money that you can make at the top. So I could start a I could start a not-for-profit and pay myself $1 million salary if I wanted to. That's cool. But eventually I'm gonna like if my entity becomes large enough and I'm coordinating with enough people, other people who joined because of this purpose would be like, well, Narayan, you don't really need $1 million salary. Like, what's the purpose of that? And does my does my salary scale with the amount of money that my company makes? Well, that seems kind of weird. And like, I could run it that way. I wouldn't. And a large part of that becomes like if I incorporate as a not-for-profit, I would actually have a board of directors that are basically on the board, and their job is to steward this organization, and they could kick me out of the CEO position if they don't think that I am actually like doing a good job at stewarding the mission of this not-for-profit. So if I'm the kind of person who's like, well, my job is to extract as much money out of this thing as possible, I would actually just set up a for-profit. Yeah. I don't know. I guess the question for you is like, do you want to have unlimited upside in terms of your growth potential? Like, do you want to eventually like have people that are making a lot of money off of this thing that you've created, or is creating the thing enough?
Yeah, I think, but like for me, it's creating the thing. But I would think that's for everyone. Like, I would think for everyone, like the goal is they want to create something that's impactful in a good way. Um, what was I gonna say? I'm trying to think about like some of the perceived issues with nonprofits. I know like government is often viewed as bureaucratic, and there's like a stigma around working even in government, like I've heard from like friends and stuff, because just seems slow. I'm just trying to, this is the first time I've thought about this, but like is that is that slow pace actually in any ways a good thing? Like I know we've talked about how like the pace at which we're going maybe is, or the direction we're going is, it's not sustainable. I'm wondering like is there any good in that maybe things are slower, or
Government is its own beast. Who is the government accountable for? To.
it's people, right?
Yeah, but there's like so much like lack of transparency that it feels difficult for an individual person to hold the government accountable in particular ways. And I think maybe our society does improve government by holding it accountable.
Through voting, right?
Yeah.
Could be like the main way, elections.
Yeah. But like if you consider the difference between like picture two corporations that actually like look the same, they have this like they look the same in most aspects except that one has a board of directors that represents shareholders that basically want to get paid. The other has a board of directors that holds the purpose to the highest value. Put me on that board. Like, I will not let your company like do inefficient things. I will not tolerate bureaucracy to the point beyond its usefulness. And these two companies, I imagine they could be equally efficient because your board of directors could be equally as successful or like good at what they do, which is motivating the company to fulfill its purpose. Is the purpose profit or is the purpose something else?
How do you think about choosing between DuckDuckGo and Google search, or like, do you think we have any obligation or duty uh, as consumers to try to use the nonprofit? Like, is that a healthy way to think? Have you thought about that?
I haven't really, because I didn't even realize that this was like a linchpin of like the new world and stuff. Like I've been listening to like game B arguments and trying to figure out what does this new platform for society look like and all of that. And I'm still not 100%. I'm still not even close to like believing that changing everything to not for profits is the thing that's going to solve our problems. But there's a huge body of research that the Post Growth Institute has put out, and now I'm going to go through that because it's right now it's the best thing that it's the most plausible thing that I've seen to actually the thing that could transform the world. So I'm going to be doing my due diligence. I'm going to hopefully put those arguments in front of the effective altruism community, get those bright minds to vet it. I'm going to throw it at the rationalists. And I know there's a whole bunch of economically minded rationalists. They're going to vet the heck out of that thing. And if it seems plausible, like give it 2 years, there could be a huge movement of people basically looking at the thing, which is like, oh, we already have a part of our society that is working. It's growing, and it just needs to outcompete the existing economy at a fast enough pitch. In which case, if all of those things are true, then I would actually place a premium on supporting a not-for-profit over a for-profit. I would prefer to buy IKEA over a for-profit. I don't know. That feels weird to say. I don't know if I would do that.
For me, I do think, and there's case by case situations, but my gut says on aggregate, I trust nonprofits more than for profits. Maybe that's different for different people. I'm going to do more thinking around that and some of the reasons why people may trust for profits more than nonprofits. Like, should we trust nonprofits more than for profits? One question I was going to ask is, you mentioned that nonprofits as a percentage of GDP is increasing, which is awesome. Why? Any any ideas why that's the case yet income inequality is still increasing? Like we've talked about how for profit might be one of the contributing factors for increasing inequality. Any idea why? I would think that if nonprofits are increasing as a percentage of GDP, income inequality might decrease.
So any extractive process is going to generate income inequality. So even if you get to the point where 75% of of the economy is operating in the closed loop, not for profit kind of economy, you've still got that 25% that is taking money out of it.
Got it. Got it. Okay, that
Yeah.
makes sense.
But
I'm
like,
gonna
what would the world look like if we had 100% nonprofits where no individual is like extracting obscene amounts? The value that you're providing here is fully correspondent to like your amount of value that you're putting into it, and everything is purpose driven. That's what I'm like thinking about, and it's gonna take years, but it'll be interesting.
I'm definitely going to look into Post Growth Institute. I haven't heard of it. Any other resources or like readings or podcasts or anything you'd recommend that will help me? Like, what are you going to do to think more about this?
So part of what I've been doing over the last like since COVID is looking into mapping and trying to map different ecosystems. I've been mapping the entire Think Better ecosystem as well. I can share that with you sometime.
Thanks.
But one of the maps that I found is put on by this organization called the Real Economy Lab. Um, or there's also a movement called New Economy, of which Post Growth Institute is a part. But back in 2016, they've mapped over 100 organizations that have various pieces of this new economy. And they are coordinating. When I talked to the Post Growth Institute, like the amount of people and other organizations in that economy that they were currently collaborating with was massive. Like I was floored. I was like, oh, okay, right. Yeah. ask me about how many, like in my day job, like at a corporation, how many other companies do I collaborate with? Well, we've got suppliers and we've got some suppliers that, and like vendors that like give us things, but it's not really like collaborative. It's like transactional. But in this ecosystem, that is a growing ecosystem. People are actually collaborating because they're all purpose driven. And to the extent that people's purposes or organizations' purposes overlap, they can share resources. They can like offer each other help in whatever way they can. And the fact that this thing is being mapped out and is growing is like, it's so cool. There's things from like grassroots, like initiatives called like the Transition Network, which is people focusing on creating sustainable like micro communities within cities to focus on the transition to the fully sustainable world. Um, there's like another organization called Seeds, which is working on a crypto solution that instead of like Bitcoin, which you can create Bitcoin by spending electricity. You're extracting resources from the world to create this money. It's an extractive crypto. There's Seeds, which is basically a crypto that you create more of it by providing actual value to the world. So it's like the inverse of Bitcoin. Bitcoin uses value to create money. This one creates money by providing value. It's just like, that's a part of the ecosystem. You connect enough of these dots and you actually have a working platform that, I don't know if it's going to be game B, but it's going to be that like new world. And so this whole network is in the process of becoming self-aware, realizing itself and being able to actually coordinate. It's going to be cool because I don't think the capitalist society can necessarily coordinate to the extent. And they don't even have any, like, there's no, actually, I'll leave it there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, maybe it's just my nature that I like to play devil's advocate, but I'm trying to think through um, if I'm bought in to the to what I think you're saying is that nonprofits lead to more collaboration than for profits. And I'm just trying to think about, okay, what gets in the way of collaboration? I think competition is what's coming to mind. And I'm just trying to think, does for profits lead to more competition than nonprofits? I can see how for profits lead to competition in terms of you're trying to protect your profit, I guess. Um, I'm just trying to think if the same applies in the case of nonprofits. Although there's no profit, I'm just trying to think. You talked about maybe in an airline example, you could have one nonprofit focused on cheapest flights, another nonprofit focused on more sustainability. I'm wondering, like, is there still competition in the sense that, like I work for a nonprofit. I don't want to lose my job. I want to ensure that my nonprofit continues to exist. I'm just trying to think through as playing devil's advocate, do the same issues still exist? And if not, what, like, why?
Well, to the extent that purposes differ and conflict with each other, I imagine that you would have competition between different purposes. Like if you have a school that teaches judo and I have a school that teaches taekwondo, and like say our missions were narrow enough that I was like, my mission is to teach as many people taekwondo as possible and you want to teach judo, we are in competition. I guess some people could learn both, but if we recapitulate our purposes as we want to teach as many people as possible how to defend themselves, and I just think that taekwondo is a better way of defending yourself and you think judo is a better way of defending yourself, we could actually meta collaborate to have a arena of competition between our two schools. But the purpose of that arena of competition would be to determine which is the better method of self-defense. And maybe we end up discovering, well, taekwondo has an advantage over judo, but judo has an advantage over aikido, which has an advantage over taekwondo. It's a rock paper scissors kind of thing. And as long as we're all meta collaborating on trying to figure out what is the best way of self-defense, then that seems important. Or like that seems like we could cooperate, like it would be a platform of cooperation where we would have competition in service of greater shared purpose. And I think that humanity, the more and more you go up in terms of levels of abstraction on purpose, the more and more we align. Like, if in the end, how many people are going to say, I actually prefer more people to be unhappy? No one's going to say that. So,
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm just trying to think about the example you gave where you're trying to find the best method of fighting. Um, and you got people in this taekwondo versus judo nonprofits. Um, and maybe each of them they operate like teaching, like schools classes where they're teaching people about these different techniques. And to your point, if both of their purposes is to help people with self-defense or whatever, then if one technique proves to be better than the other, I'm just trying to think, do the people in the other camp all lose their job, or do they all come over and join the other organization? I'm just trying to think about, like, yeah, the main issue that comes to mind for nonprofits and being scared to collaborate would be maybe losing my job. I don't know.
well, and I guess what I would consider, like, we could even use that same example, which would be, you say the general industry is like, you need one instructor for every 20 students. If it proves out that judo is more effective, you then need more judo instructors, and so maybe
Exactly.
the taekwondo people reskill or something.
Exactly. Like today, 50 students are going to this taekwondo studio, 50 are going to the judo. If judo proves itself to be better, you still have 100 people looking for learning. They all just go to judo now. You need more instructors. Maybe this example is too abstract, but
Yeah.
I think it makes sense to me.
Well,
Um,
and possibly, like, what are the stakes of losing your job in today's unequal society? The stakes are very high. You don't want to be put into the quadrant of people who are like racked with debt and like barely getting by. You
right.
want to be on the winners. You want to be the person extracting, because that's stability. But if you have this fully circulating economy, does that mean that the stakes of losing your job are actually much lower? Because there would be, like, I don't know, maybe things are less expensive. I don't have gears here, but like, like, I imagine in a fully circular economy that you'd be able to care for everyone. And so the stakes of losing your particular job at a particular thing, because that purpose society has deemed is no longer important, you would have the stability, because it seems like maybe it would be important for society to help you find something that then adds more value back into society, because you're more valuable contributing than you are not contributing.
Huh. Makes sense.
Super speculative, but I mean, if I lived in this world, in this circular economy, and I
Yeah.
noticed that there was an issue with people losing their jobs and not being able to contribute anymore, I would create a thing that would help them contribute again. And that would be a valuable use for my time. And I could start a nonprofit about that.
Cool. I know we're at time. Anything you want to say in closing?
Just like, thank you for your time. This is all so new to me. I'm still not even bought into the arguments that I'm sort of like portraying, but I'm really excited about the potential that this discussion has. And this is possibly one of the earlier conversations on this topic. Like, if this blows up in 5 years, we can say, can I ask you a question? You heard it here first.
Cool. Well, please send me the map that you did for Think Better. I haven't seen, I think, the type of map you're talking about, so I'm curious to see what it looks like and wrap my
Yeah,
head
I'll
around it.
send that to you
All right.
for sure.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We'll chat soon.
Have a good one.
Thanks, you too. Bye.